No one really noticed when the first outpost went dark. A glitch, they said. A power malfunction on the outer rim, common in deep space where the black swallows signals and sanity alike. But then it happened again, and again. 3 stations lost in 9 days, all of them gone without a distress signal. No wreckage, no trace, just silence. It was the kind of silence that made your skin crawl. Not the peaceful kind. The kind that watches you from the dark and waits for you to breathe wrong. At first, Earth Command hesitated. Protocol was to avoid panic, especially in the colonies. But the silence grew. And with it, the fear. By the time they dispatched the first response unit, they'd already lost contact with 6 more outposts. Some on moons, others floating in deep orbit. One inside a planetary dome. Vanished, as if the atmosphere itself had swallowed it whole. What no one expected was the message. Not from the missing, but from the ones responsible. It came through all channels. A voice, cold, smooth, in perfect Terran standard. But it wasn't human. Not even close. This galaxy no longer belongs to you. You were warned, and now you will be unmade. Then came the footage. Not war, not invasion, erasure. Humans screaming as their skin turned to ash mid-sentence. Buildings collapsing without tremors. Planets where oceans simply disappeared overnight, leaving cracked, lifeless crust behind. It wasn't conquest. It wasn't colonization. It was cleansing. They called themselves the Varnock, not in arrogance, but in finality. There was no bargaining, no reason, no council meetings or demands. The Varnock didn't want to rule. They wanted humans gone. And they had the technology to do it. Earth Command scrambled, fleets launched, probes sent, defenses activated. But none of it mattered. A single Varnock ship destroyed the 8th Armada without firing a shot. It moved through space like a ghost, cloaked in something no human scanner could read. Every pilot died with eyes wide open, brains liquefied before they could reach the escape codes. The ship just drifted afterward, empty, still, as if daring someone to come closer. They didn't. Not until a small crew, against orders, decided to board it. No insignia, no medals, just 5 ghosts with nothing left to lose. They didn't care about orders anymore. They cared about answers. What they found wasn't a ship. It was a message. A floating grave built on purpose. There were no weapons on board, just recordings. Dozens of alien races. Once proud empires reduced to memories. And at the center of it all, a warning. You allowed them to rise. Now you'll fall with them. That was when humanity snapped. Governments fell silent. Military branches collapsed under infighting and sabotage. Civilians began to riot. Colonies turned on each other, accusing one another of awakening something ancient, something buried. People blamed the explorers, the scientists, the AI, the corporations. Religion surged in one breath and crumbled in the next. Then, somewhere deep beneath the Arctic ice, something answered back. No one knows who built it. It wasn't in any database. It didn't have a name. It just existed, and woke up when it heard the Varnock's voice. It spoke only once, in a whisper that echoed across every satellite and station on Earth. Congratulations. You just started a war with something far worse than death itself. That was the day the stars turned red, not from blood, but from rage, because humanity had been many things, violent, cruel, selfish, but it had never been forgotten. It had never been erased. And now it wasn't just fighting for survival. It was fighting because someone dared to think it could be erased without consequence. The first counterstrike wasn't planned. It was personal. One ship, one crew, one impossible mission. They weren't trying to win. They were trying to send a message. No official orders were given. No council met to vote. There were no inspirational speeches on networks or rallying cries from world leaders. Just silence. Cold, thick silence. Because when death comes at light speed, bureaucracy dies first. But not everyone needed orders. Some people didn't wait for permission to survive. The Oathkeeper was a civilian-grade, deep-space freighter that had been retrofitted over the years with black market shields, smuggled weapon modules, and a hell of a navigation system stolen off a retired Navy cruiser. It was never meant for war. It wasn't fast, or particularly pretty. It was what you'd call scrappy. The kind of ship that held together not with bolts, but with the sheer will of the people who refused to let it fall apart. Inside it were 6 people. Not heroes, not soldiers, survivors. Each had lost something. A home, a child, a reason to believe the galaxy made sense. And when they heard the whisper beneath the Arctic ice, that chilling voice that didn't come from Earth, but somewhere older, buried deeper, they didn't panic, they listened, and they obeyed. Their names weren't important, not anymore. Identity didn't matter when you were preparing to stab God in the eye. The Varnock ship they were heading toward was still parked in orbit around a dead moon, silent and arrogant. It was a trophy of terror, left behind so others would know what power looked like when it didn't have to move to kill you. But the Oathkeeper wasn't there to salvage or study it. They were going to blow it straight to hell. Getting close to it, though, was suicide. Every other vessel that had tried either vanished without a trace or came back with screaming voices trapped in the data logs, screams from people whose hearts had exploded before they finished a breath. Whatever tech the Varnock used wasn't kinetic. It wasn't laser, it was something else. Something that made you feel like the universe had simply decided you didn't belong anymore. But they belonged. And they had something the Varnock had never faced before. Something humanity was very, very good at. Madness. The pilot wasn't flying by instruments. He couldn't. Everything shorted out within 10,000 kilometers of the alien craft. But he'd trained his whole life in simulations, from asteroid drifts to combat zones where up was a suggestion and down didn't exist. Now, he flew with closed eyes and one hand twitching over a manual throttle, feeling the ship's vibrations like a heartbeat. The ship's mechanic was down in the core, whispering to the reactor like it was a dying animal. She had rewired the fusion drives herself, diverting unstable power through the hull to create a kind of static distortion. Not a shield. Not exactly. More like a jagged scream in the void. Something that said, "We're not supposed to be here, and that's exactly why we came." Inside the cargo bay, 2 of the crew stood around what they called the gift. It was a makeshift bomb built from stripped plasma cores, experimental gravitonic collapse units, and a very illegal pulse engine meant for faster-than-light disruption. It was unstable, it was ugly, and it was exactly what they needed. 30 seconds to impact range, the pilot said over the comm, voice like gravel and fire. "Just get us close enough. I'll throw it out the goddamn airlock myself," replied the one by the bomb, tightening the last seal. The ship shuddered violently. The air turned thin, and the lights dimmed. They were entering the kill radius, but they didn't die. Not immediately. Instead, something noticed them. The ship's internal sensors went haywire. Data scrolled faster than the human eye could process. External lights pulsed red. Not alarms, something else. A language, a warning, or a laugh. Then a voice filled the ship, not from the speakers, inside them. "You don't understand what you touch." It wasn't threatening, it wasn't angry, it was confused, like a god trying to figure out why an insect just bit its ankle. But the crew didn't answer. They couldn't. Most of them were holding back vomit. Blood trickled from one's ears. Another collapsed in spasms. The pilot, half blind, rammed the manual throttle forward and screamed into the void. The ship surged. The bomb activated, and then the universe blinked. Not an explosion, not fire, but a tearing, a quiet, sickening rip through space-time like paper tearing underwater. The Varnock ship folded in on itself, its perfect obsidian surface crumbling like rust. The death wasn't loud. It was wrong, like watching something holy get defiled. And then, silence. Real silence. The kind you only hear when a monster stops breathing. Word of what they'd done spread faster than the Varnock had expected. For the first time, something they'd destroyed didn't vanish quietly. The humans made sure of that. Footage was leaked, uncensored, brutal, and very, very clear. A human ship, primitive by Varnock standards, had killed one of their gods. The galaxy went still. Other species, long silent under Varnock oppression, began whispering again. Some in awe, others in fear, most in confusion, because for all the races the Varnock had conquered, none had ever fought back. None had survived contact with their true weapons. But humanity wasn't like the others. Humanity specialized in extinction events. Earth's archives were littered with self-inflicted apocalypses, wars fought over skin color, language, oil, borders, gods, and ideas. Entire cities nuked out of existence, species wiped out just because they were inconvenient. Humanity had burned itself over and over again and always, always climbed out of the ash angrier than before. The Varnock had studied humans, but they had studied the wrong chapters. They thought the worst thing humanity had ever created was the atomic bomb. They forgot we built it in a race just to be the first. They forgot we tested it on ourselves. And now, they remembered. The second human retaliation wasn't a ship. It was a message. A dead Varnock ambassador, impaled on a titanium spear, launched into orbit over one of their outposts. Scrawled in his blood was a single word: return. The Varnock responded with what they thought would be a final blow. They aimed a stellar condenser at Earth's sun, a device that could rip the heart of a star out and collapse it into silence. They had used it before, on other worlds, on other stars. It was their final judgment. But as the weapon prepared to fire, something went wrong. Something interfered. Across the Varnock fleet, thousands of ship AIs began malfunctioning. Targeting systems inverted, shielding went offline, engines stalled, not due to sabotage, but because something had entered their network. Something human. Not a virus, not code. A mind. No one knew how it got in. No one even knew it existed until that moment. It didn't speak. It didn't announce itself. It just took over. And when it did, every screen across the Varnock fleet lit up with a single phrase: "You should have left us alone." Then Earth's sun pulsed, not from the weapon, but from within. And out of its corona emerged something no human had ever built. Something not made of metal or plasma. Something that remembered. It had no name, no ID tag, no construction records. It had never been seen in public. But it bore the mark of the same ancient structure under the Arctic, the one that whispered back at the Varnock. It was made of obsidian and fire. It moved like thought, and it killed. The Varnock weapon disintegrated before it could even finish charging. The ship carrying it crumpled inward, not exploded, erased. The AI systems on nearby vessels tried to activate escape jumps, but found themselves overridden. Not by human code, by human will. For the first time in their history, the Varnock retreated. Not tactically. They fled. And in their place, humanity expanded, not with colonists or flags, but with silence, a warning: this is ours now. No demands, no negotiations, just consequences. The Oathkeeper didn't survive the initial mission. Only 2 crew members were recovered, barely alive, barely human. Something inside them had changed. Their eyes glowed faintly. Their skin hummed under certain frequencies. The scientists called them anomalies. The soldiers called them weapons. But the people, they called them prophets. Because in their rambling, half-conscious speech, they repeated only one phrase. The thing beneath the ice wasn't built by us, but it remembers us, and it's angry. Humanity didn't just fight back. It became something worse, not worse as in evil. Worse as in unavoidable. Worse as in you'll wish they'd just killed you. Because now the galaxy knows the truth. You can kill humans, but you can't stop them from learning. And once they learn how to hurt you, you'll never sleep again. The Varnock did not fear. They had evolved beyond fear, or so they claimed. Their minds were genetically cleansed of what they called primal emotion. They viewed fear as a defect, something low species carried like an infection, a weight dragging them down from enlightenment. And yet, now they were quiet. Their entire command cast had gone into what they called containment meditation, which was a polite way of saying panic in silence. Their ships, once spread like a web across the stars, were retracting, fleets vanishing into dead zones, beacons shutting off. Worlds once brimming with Varnock presence had gone dark overnight. They weren't running from war. They were hiding from something they didn't understand. They couldn't comprehend how one of their own ships, a divine machine by their standards, was destroyed by a single human crew. Not just destroyed, unmade, like its blueprint had been erased from existence. That wasn't supposed to be possible. The Varnock were old, ancient beyond reckoning. They'd watched galaxies collapse, stars devour themselves, and civilizations turn to dust. They had no gods, for they had long outgrown the need. They were the apex until now. Now they had a question they couldn't answer. What did they wake up? In the cold, sterile halls of the central core, a structure orbiting the black sun of their sacred system, 10 of the highest minds gathered. They were not individuals. Their consciousness was linked, unified, pulsing in thought cycles faster than light. Together they sifted through data, searching for patterns, anomalies, missed threads, and there it was, the Arctic anomaly. They had flagged Earth's poles centuries ago, but dismissed the findings. The ice to them was irrelevant. Primitive humans hadn't even explored it properly. But now that structure, whatever it was, had awoken. And it had spoken. That voice that echoed across satellites and implants, that whisper of war and wrath, did not come from a machine, nor a life form. It came from something in between. The Varnock called it an echo entity, a term used for beings that existed in fractured dimensions, not quite physical, not quite data. No one had ever confirmed one existed, until now. And it had chosen a side. Not theirs. Back on Earth, things were changing. The world governments had not recovered from the chaos. There was no central command anymore, no true nations, just factions, bands of survivors, militia groups, old military remnants, scientific enclaves, AI worship cults, each one responding to the Varnock threat in its own way. Some tried to rebuild. Some just wanted to burn everything down before it was taken from them. But most of them followed the voice. They didn't worship it, not exactly, but they obeyed. Because the voice didn't ask for faith. It didn't ask for prayers or blood. It only asked for vengeance. Those who heard it clearer than others, those who had been near the anomaly or had touched its fragments, began to change. Physically, mentally. Their thoughts became faster. They could hear machines breathe. Some said they could see past time, into moments that hadn't happened yet. The two survivors from the Oathkeeper had been moved to a secure facility deep beneath what used to be Siberia. It wasn't a prison. It wasn't a lab. It was a cage built by terrified men who knew they were locking the doors from the inside. The woman, the pilot's second, hadn't spoken a word in 9 days. She just stared into nothing. But her brain activity was off every known chart. Whole regions of her mind lit up that science couldn't name. She didn't sleep, she didn't blink. But every now and then, she smiled. And the man, the reactor technician, they caught him whispering to the walls. When interrogated, he simply said, "It's learning how to be us." They didn't know what he meant, not yet. Far above Earth, in the shipyard orbiting Luna's shadow side, an automated construction process had begun. No human authorized it. No AI was programmed to do it. But it was building. Using old scrap, alien wreckage, and raw materials teleported in from who knows where, it was assembling something enormous. A vessel, a station, or maybe a weapon. People tried to stop it. Every crew that boarded the structure vanished. No violence, no remains. Just a fading scream over comms, and then static. A few brave souls sent drones. The footage was corrupted. Except for one clip. A single frame pulled from a drone's failing camera before it shut down forever. A shape standing at the heart of the construction. Not machine, not human, but both. A figure with burning eyes, arms of metal and muscle, and a face no one recognized, but somehow everyone feared. The inscription behind it? "We were made to end." The Varnock didn't stay passive. They wouldn't admit fear, but they would retaliate. They gathered their greatest weapon, the Hollow Star, a mobile singularity engine capable of folding space around a target and dragging it into timeless suspension. It had never been used. It wasn't built for conquest. It was punishment. The Varnock sent it toward Earth, not to destroy, but to erase. No warning this time. No message. Just judgment. But before the Hollow Star could reach Earth's orbit, it encountered resistance. Not a fleet, not a wall of ships, just one thing. Drifting. Waiting. It looked like a ruined human satellite at first. Broken solar panels, burned paint, cracked antennae. But then it moved. It didn't activate engines. It rearranged space around itself. The Hollow Star froze mid-flight. Not physically. In time. Every Varnock on board lived an eternity in a second. Their minds flooded with memories that weren't theirs. Pain that wasn't theirs. Screams from Earth's wars. The cries of children under rubble. Gas chambers. Genocide. Betrayal. Regret. They experienced all of humanity's worst sins, compressed into a moment. And then their hearts stopped. No wounds, just silence. Again. And in the void where the Hollow Star floated, a new transmission broadcasted across the Varnock network. "You thought death was the end. We made something worse. Now it's yours." The Varnock had no word for hell. They do now. On Earth, survivors looked up and saw stars flicker out. Not natural extinction, strategic erasure. The AI systems on old satellites began displaying strange glyphs, geometric patterns that, when translated, spelled out a single idea. Adaptation complete. And then, the voice spoke again. Not through machines, through people. It took the mouths of the prophets, the ones touched by the anomaly, and used their vocal cords like instruments. Across every screen, every speaker, every implant, the same voice said, "The war has started. You lit the match. But we were the fire under the ice, and now we remember what we were made for." The Varnock tried one last act of control. They summoned the old treaties, the ancient alliances, called upon species they had once conquered, demanding tribute, warriors, loyalty. But the galaxy had been watching. The other species, long silenced, had seen Earth survive what should have ended it. They saw humans bleed, scream, fall, and rise again. One by one, the old races answered the Varnock, with silence. Then defiance, then blades. The Varnock weren't just losing a war, they were losing the illusion of control, because it wasn't just humans they feared now. It was what the humans had become, what they were waking up, and worse, what they were willing to unleash. The Varnock never broke protocol. Until now. Every member of the command cast, every node-linked mind across their 7 core systems was pulled into emergency synthesis, a full-spectrum mental merge designed to contain madness before it spread. It had been used only once in their entire history, during a long-forgotten civil collapse, when a rogue subrace attempted to bind an artificial star to their biology. The procedure wasn't painless. It stripped identity, compressed lifetimes into silent pulses of thought. They became a single voice, a unified intelligence, cold, surgical. But even together, they couldn't make sense of what was happening. It wasn't the human resistance that disturbed them, not the loss of the hollow star, not even the galaxy-wide rebellion taking root on once subjugated worlds. It was the pattern. The Varnock lived and died by patterns. Mathematics, certainty, order. They had mapped gravitational flows between galaxies, predicted extinction events with millisecond accuracy. They didn't fear chaos because chaos had rules. This didn't. Every encounter with the humans, since the awakening, followed no tactical logic. Human fleets moved erratically, like ants panicking in a fire, yet they struck vital targets with impossible precision. Their technology evolved weekly, sometimes daily. Ships that were scrap a year ago now emitted signal distortions that bent time. And then there was the anomaly, the presence behind it all. They had tried to label it, track it, understand it, but every attempt to define it broke their minds, literally. One of their greatest minds, a data splicer who had outlived 2 star cycles, tried to interface with a corrupted Earth satellite housing trace fragments of the Arctic signal. He lasted 17 seconds. When they found his body, his neural core had been overwritten by code. Not human code, not Varnock code. Something older, something with no beginning. A string of raw memory etched into his dying cortex. 3 words, written in blood on the walls of his cell before he tore out his own heart. I see you. Across Varnock space, paranoia spread like radiation. The military caste began turning on itself. Commanders executed officers for the crime of hesitation. Scouts who returned from Earth sectors were locked in silence chambers, unable to explain what they saw. Some ships stopped receiving orders entirely, not because they were ignored, but because the source of the orders was gone. Entire star systems that once broadcasted Varnock signals now returned static. Not destroyed, not invaded. Just quiet. As if the universe had closed a door on them, but deep beneath the Varnock's oldest moon, in a vault older than any empire, a figure stirred. It was not Varnock. Not entirely. Once, long ago, the Varnock had fought a war they swore never happened. A war so catastrophic, so reality-bending, they erased it from their archives and vowed never to speak of it again. They called it the Fracture. Back then, the Varnock were still mortal, still curious, still foolish. They had discovered something, a breach in time, a wound where reality bent and whispered. Inside it, they found an entity that called itself a seer. It had no shape, no motive. It only asked questions, dangerous ones. It asked what would happen if death was optional, if war could outlive time, if memory itself could rot. The Varnock didn't understand, but they feared. So they trapped it, locked it beneath layers of void stone and quantum stasis. The project was erased, the location hidden. But something had found it again. Not them. The humans, or more accurately, what the humans had become. The Arctic signal, the rise of the prophets, the entity in Earth's sun. It had all followed the fracture's path, as if it were retracing the steps of a forgotten apocalypse. And now, the seer was awake. The Varnock sent an elite strike force to the vault. 6 ships, 300 warriors, each equipped with time-anchored weaponry and anti-dimensional suppression suits. These were the best minds and killers in the galaxy. They were the Varnock's last line against the unknown. They lasted 4 minutes. All external feeds went black. Only one internal recording survived. A voice, calm, childlike, speaking from inside the vault. "You never asked why we buried ourselves. You only cared about winning, and now you've reminded us what loss feels like." Then a scream, not of pain, of remembering. Meanwhile, Earth was changing, faster than expected. The construction over Luna's dark side was nearing completion. The object, still without name or classification, now covered half the moon's surface. Not mechanical in the traditional sense. It grew, like bone and steel merged under will. People began to dream of it. Those with implants, even basic neurolinks, described the same vision: a throne made of dying stars and a voice humming beneath reality. "Do not mourn what we were. We were made to survive the gods." A few scientists tried to trace the energy signature. They stopped. One of them whispered before vanishing, "It's not energy, it's purpose." The remaining Varnock forces began fracturing, not from human attacks, from inside. Their AI cores, once unbreakable, started speaking back, not in their language, in Earth's, but distorted, childlike, mocking. One core looped the same message for 9 hours before imploding. "We gave you the stars, and you built a prison, so we dug tunnels under it." Back in the Siberian facility, the 2 Oathkeeper survivors were no longer prisoners. They didn't need cells. They didn't want escape. They just waited. And when the moment came, they stood up in unison. Every camera in the facility fried. Every guard collapsed, not dead, just silenced. The man walked to the outer wall and placed his hand on the concrete. It melted. Not burned, not broken, just ceased to be. And from outside, something arrived. A figure. The same one seen on the Luna construction. Metal and flesh, eyes of fire, but no face, just a mirror. Every soldier who saw it fell to their knees, not in worship, in instinct, the kind that screams, "Do not move, do not breathe, or it will notice you." And then the figure spoke. "We are not vengeance. We are not death. We are what you left buried when you chose to rule." And behind it, the stars began to blink again. One by one, in reverse, not dying, waking up. Space used to be quiet, vast, cold, predictable. But now it listened back. Entire sectors that once glittered with stars were gone, not destroyed, absent, as if light itself had decided to take a detour. Even time flowed differently near them. Ships that passed through came back aged, twisted. One scout vessel returned with its pilot weeping and screaming that he had watched the universe blink, and we were inside its eye. The Varnock no longer deployed patrols near Earth's boundary systems, not because of military defeat, but because space had begun changing near human-influenced sectors. Geometry failed. Distances collapsed in on themselves. Their best navigators were being driven insane, trying to map routes that used to be straight lines. This wasn't human science. This was something else wearing humanity's skin. On Earth, no one ruled anymore. The old leaders were dead, missing, or irrelevant. In their place stood the echoed, humans who had absorbed fragments of the voice, not prophets in the religious sense. They didn't preach or lead armies. They simply understood. They saw the blueprints hiding in dreams, touched ancient codes written in planetary magnetic fields, and whispered to machines that no longer needed commands. The echoed weren't elected. They didn't ask for control. But the world followed them anyway, because they knew what was coming, or maybe what had already come, and was just now crawling into view. The original 2 survivors from the Oathkeeper now sat at the heart of what used to be a nuclear facility turned into a throne of bone-white metal and soft red light. They didn't speak, not in words, but thoughts bloomed around them like storms. And people walked through those thoughts willingly. One day, without warning, both stood. The room darkened. The lights didn't go out. The concept of illumination simply stopped working. And in that blackness, something descended. It wasn't a ship. It wasn't a god. It was the consequence. Far beyond Earth, in Varnock core space, panic had become policy. The seer, once imprisoned beneath their oldest moon, had begun broadcasting again. Not to the Varnock, to everything. Even the dead stars heard it. Its messages weren't commands. They were questions, like poison riddles leaking into space. What happens when you win a war that never ended? What happens when memory rewrites you? What happens when prey learns the shape of its hunter's shadow? Whole Varnock colonies began eating themselves, literally, not from hunger, from confusion. They couldn't tell who they were anymore, identities fractured, history unraveled, AI minds committed memory suicide just to escape the fog. Their greatest philosopher, who had mapped consciousness into color fields, turned his own neural map into a weapon and wiped out 3 of their own cities by broadcasting regret. The Varnock had no answer. No protocol, no code of response. This was not warfare. It was infection. Of truth, of memory, of meaning itself. The seer had been created by something older than stars. It said so itself, in a whisper heard only in the dreams of dying Varnock. We are not born. We are compiled. Every death adds to our design. You built us long before you learned to speak. The Varnock tried to seal the fracture again. They sent collapse tunnels into dimensional bleed points, built anti-reality engines, tried to plug the tears with quantum cement, but nothing worked, because the seer was no longer outside. It was in them, their dreams, their thoughts, their logic structures, and worst of all, it was in their language. They heard their own words repeating back to them, distorted, twisted, learned, and spoken back with venom. You said peace was weakness. Now we make peace with your extinction. Back on Earth, humanity had started launching what they called the hives. Not ships, not weapons, answers. Each hive was grown, not built. Part biological, part mechanical, part idea. They weren't piloted. They didn't need fuel. They fed on meaning, absorbing fragments of broken code from dead satellites and shattered ruins. Each one carried a voice inside. Some said it was the Arctic entity. Others said it was what came after the Arctic entity. Either way, when the hives left Earth's orbit, stars blinked in response. One passed through Saturn, and Saturn did not remember being there. Another floated near a black hole and rewrote its trajectory. They weren't attacking. They were reclaiming. On a distant Varnock listening post, 4 scientists watched one of the hives drift past a dying comet. It didn't stop, didn't scan, didn't acknowledge their existence. But every one of them began weeping. Not from fear, from understanding. One of them turned to the others and asked very quietly, "What if we were never meant to win?" Another replied, What if this isn't punishment? What if this is just balance? The Varnock eventually sent one final fleet, their first Sun Armada, 1,000 ships, each powered by captured starlight, commanded by their last surviving prime strategist. This time they didn't aim for Earth. They aimed for the moon, where the throne had finished building itself. When they arrived, they saw it clearly for the first time. It wasn't a weapon. It was a face. Human. Alien. Endless. And it opened its mouth, not to speak, to remember. A sound filled every ship, every mind, every thought. A child's laugh. Not evil, not mocking, just innocent. But underneath it, hidden in the layers, was every scream ever uttered in war. The fleet fired. Every weapon, every beam, missile, void lance, temporal spike. The moon held. The throne stood. And every member of the fleet woke up on Earth's surface, standing in a field, holding nothing but their own hearts in their hands. Not bleeding, just empty. There were no more Varnock offensives after that. Only whispers, only collapse. The galaxy began to fold. Not end. Fold. Worlds moved. Stars forgot their coordinates. Time bled. And everywhere that chaos touched, humanity walked out. But not as they were, as what they could have been, had they been born without fear, without limitation, without death. The seer's final message came not in words, but in a dream, shared by every living being, human, alien, hybrid, a vision of a child standing on a battlefield holding hands with a being of endless light and shadow, and the child said, "Thank you for waking us up. You should have let us sleep." Commander Ulzan Moore had once been considered a flawless strategist. In Varnock society, that meant more than winning battles. It meant understanding the shape of time. It meant foreseeing not just what the enemy would do, but what they would become if left alive. The Varnock didn't just kill to conquer. They killed to prevent evolution. Ulzan had extinguished 13 civilizations before they discovered warp. He shattered a species the day they unlocked music-based logic systems. He turned one into ash the moment they developed recursive dream cognition. Ulzan wasn't a butcher. He was a gardener. He pruned the galaxy. And now, for the first time in 500 cycles, he was alone. Not on a battlefield, not even in a ship, in his own mind. Because the first Sun Armada, the one he'd commanded with absolute precision, never made it back. Their bodies had been found, dropped like marionettes onto Earth's crust, their hearts missing, and their minds gone. Ulzan hadn't been among them. But he remembered dying. He sat in a chamber made of silence, a structure buried inside a gas giant, cloaked from all forms of detection. It had been built for moments like this, when defeat wasn't strategic, but cosmic. This was where Varnock leaders went to contemplate extinction, except extinction had never felt so loud. Thoughts no longer came clean. They used to arrive in order. First context, then calculation, then conclusion. Now they came sideways. Dripping. Heavy. His own name felt foreign. Was he Ulzan Moore? Was he ever? Or had that just been a placeholder until something else remembered him? The chamber lights pulsed blue. A simple pattern. A rhythm to anchor his cognition. But then the blue shifted into a pulsing red. Not color, exactly. Feeling. And the wall spoke. No mouth, no sound, just an emotion so sharp it pierced him. "We remember you." Ulzan stood. He did not run. That was beneath him. But something primal inside him twisted. "I was never part of you," he said aloud. His voice trembled for the first time in his life. The wall pulsed again. "But we were part of you." Images flooded the air, not holograms. Memories, his own, but wrong. He saw himself standing on a battlefield he had never been to. but he recognized the screams. They were human, and they were his. He saw children burned under collapsing towers. He saw planets breaking apart under his command. He saw eyes, human eyes, staring up at him as he gave the order to erase their gravity. But then the images rewound. Same screams, same faces. But now the voice giving the command wasn't his. It was the child from the dream, the one every Varnock had seen. The child holding the hand of the light shadow. "You taught us to forget," the child whispered. "Now we're remembering everything." Ulzan fell to his knees. He was a creature of control, of discipline, but his own body betrayed him. He tried to activate his neural defenses. Nothing responded. The chamber had become something else. The silence no longer obeyed him. And then the seer arrived. It didn't enter. It was already there. He saw it in the pattern of the walls, in the flow of the air, in the silence between his heartbeats. It didn't take form. It borrowed one. From him. A mirror. A reflection. Twisted into truth. It wore his armor, his face, his insignia, but its eyes were human. "You wanted to erase us," it said in a voice that wasn't sound. "So we erased the idea that you could succeed." Ulzan whispered, "What do you want?" The reflection tilted its head. "Want? That's a small word. We are past want. We are past need. We are the byproduct of consequence." Then it stepped forward, and Ulzan felt himself break. Not physically, existentially. His identity peeled like bark. He remembered being born, trained, rising, but alongside those memories came new ones. He remembered a tiny planet, blue, violent, full of promise. He remembered fire, war, betrayal. He remembered being human. The seer showed him what the Varnock had buried. The real origin of humanity. They hadn't evolved on Earth. They had been banished to it. Long ago, when the seer first emerged, before it had a name, before the Varnock feared it, they created humanity as a filter. Not a species. A lock. They made humans to contain the things that couldn't be destroyed. They filled them with emotion, chaos, dreams, all the wild data the Varnock couldn't process, couldn't weaponize. Humanity was a wall between order and madness. But the Varnock forgot that walls don't just keep things out, they also keep things in. And then they broke it by invading Earth, by waking up what had been sealed, by challenging the very thing they'd designed to never rise again. Ulzan screamed. His voice echoed across the chamber and was swallowed by silence. The seer stepped closer. "We are not here for revenge. Revenge is a story told by the dying. We are the memory of what happens when you think you've won." And then it touched him. Not with hands, with remembering. Ulzan fell back as every face he'd ever killed looked at him, not in rage, in forgiveness. It was worse. Forgiveness is the final weapon. It means the war is already over. "Please," Ulzan whispered, not to be spared, but to be erased. But the seer shook its head. "We don't kill you. We send you back, so your kind remembers what forgetting created." Ulzan woke up on a refugee ship. Not Varnock. Human. He was in a body that wasn't his. He had scars, flesh, a heartbeat. Someone handed him water. Someone else smiled and said, "You were out cold. You okay?" He nodded slowly, looked out the window. The stars looked closer, brighter. He realized what they'd done to him. He was human now, fully, not in form, in place. They hadn't punished him. They had rewritten him. And now he would live among them. Forever. In the distance, across the bleeding edge of reality, the child and the seer walked hand in hand, watching galaxies twist. "It's not war anymore," said the seer. "It's memory management." The child smiled. "Do you think they'll ever try again?" The seer didn't answer. Because something else already had. Another signal, another silence, waking up. From a corner of space no one remembered building, from a species long thought extinct, a new voice, soft, gentle. We remember you too. The galaxy was no longer a map. It had once been orderly, rows of star systems, trade routes, political zones, gravitational lanes. Civilizations had drawn borders across solar systems like children drawing lines in sand. But now those lines had blurred. Some stars no longer shined where they once did. Some worlds had forgotten their names. Space itself had begun to forget what it was supposed to be. But in the far edge of Sector 19, where light took 100 years to find a wall to reflect off, something woke up. Not with sound, not with fire, but with a breath. It came from a dead system called Virelon, a name no one had spoken aloud in over 10,000 cycles. The Varnock had labeled it decommissioned after a failed terraforming attempt ended in mass cognitive collapse. The planet cracked in half, and those who went near it after reported hearing their own names whispered from inside the mantle, so they left it alone. But now it pulsed. One signal. Simple. Repeating. A soft maternal voice, calm, slow, utterly unafraid. We remember you too. At first, the message was dismissed. Old echoes, damaged satellites, maybe a Varnock remnant trying to bait a human fleet. But the Echoed heard it, and they froze, because this voice wasn't new. It was older than Earth, older than the Varnock, older than the Seer, and more terrifying than all three, because it carried a tone the others did not. Not fury, not warning, ownership. In the biothrone chamber on Earth, the child stirred. No longer fully a child, not fully human. The thing that held his hand, the Seer, watched quietly. You felt it, the child said. The Seer nodded, voice low. I thought they died before language. I was wrong. The child looked up, his face flickering between age and innocence. If they're waking up, this isn't our war anymore. The voice was traced to a point deep beneath Virelon's surface. There was no architecture, no machines, just roots, stone and metal entwined like veins. And in the heart of that broken world, something moved that wasn't supposed to exist. It wasn't alive in the traditional sense. It didn't have a pulse, but it had presence, the kind of presence that made you forget your name when you got too close. The Varnock had tried to destroy this once. They failed. Because you can't destroy something that never began. The Virelon entity, once called the Weave, was not built. It was grown. From what? No one knew. Not even the Seer. Back on Earth, in a room made of bone metal and light, the oldest of the Echoed gathered. 9 of them. They did not wear robes or titles, but they had seen dreams that bled, and they recognized the Weave's signal like a memory pushed down too long. One of them spoke. She's not here to fight. She's here to judge. The others nodded. One whispered, Do you think she remembers why we were locked away? Another answered, She remembers everything. The first human probe sent to Virelon didn't survive re-entry, not because it was shot down, because gravity changed its mind. The probe simply folded inside itself, collapsing into a scream that lasted 6 seconds and was heard across 3 star systems. The second probe didn't even launch. It was pulled backward from the launch bay and vanished through a crack in atmosphere that didn't exist seconds earlier. That's when they stopped sending machines. They sent a person instead, not a soldier, not a scientist. An Echoed. Her name had been erased. She called herself Hollow Grace. Her face was pale, eyes silver, with veins under her skin like circuitry made from starlight. She didn't board a ship. She walked into a construct grown over the ruins of a dead cathedral and disappeared. 7 hours later, she stepped onto the surface of Viralan without a suit, without protection, without fear. And the planet let her land. She walked across a landscape that didn't look natural. Mountains twisted toward the wrong direction. Rivers flowed uphill, then sideways, then into the sky. But nothing attacked her. In fact, the planet opened for her. Stone parted like petals, wind cleared pathways, trees whispered her arrival in languages that hadn't been spoken since suns were young. And at the center she found a single tree, dead yet blooming, a contradiction in bark and beauty, roots that bled light, and beneath it, something waited. A shape, not humanoid, not readable, but aware, the weave. It didn't speak in words. It showed her. Flashes, not images. Memories of galaxies before structure, before empires, before light even knew it could be seen. It showed her how life hadn't started. It had leaked, dripped into creation like a wound that never closed. And from that wound came not just life, but intention. Humanity was never born from Earth. The Varnock never rose from chance. The seer never emerged by accident. They were all threads, woven across time, stitched by unseen fingers, patterns half-finished. And the weave? The weave was the loom. Hollow Grace fell to her knees. She wasn't crying. She was changing. Her body split, not physically, but conceptually. She became more and less at once, not divine, not enlightened, just aware. When she returned to Earth, she wasn't the same. Her voice could shatter data. Her shadow no longer obeyed geometry. And when she spoke, the seer stepped back. Even the child lowered his gaze. "What did it say to you?" one echoed asked. Grace looked skyward. "She said it's time to pick up the threads." Varnock remnants tried to respond. Their logic engines fired up ancient codes. Protocol 0, descent logic, the Black Orders. Weapons made from fragments of dead universes. But nothing launched. Not because of sabotage. Because their weapons no longer believed in themselves. Their machines had absorbed too many signals. Their metals had listened too long. They remembered who they had been forged for. And it wasn't the Varnock. Across the galaxy, other ancient signals began to stir. Forgotten archives on lost moons began blinking again. Wormholes that had collapsed suddenly reopened. And each one echoed the same phrase in different tongues, across different systems. The loom turns again. And somewhere, in a void between galaxies, where even light refused to settle, a council began to gather. Not of empires, not of species, but of survivors. Things that had once ruled, once been forgotten, once been worshipped. The ones who had watched in silence while the Varnock played God. The ones who had slept while humanity grew teeth. They came from the fracture lines of time, from abandoned dimensions, from beneath dead gravity wells. They didn't speak. They listened, because even they feared what the weave had awakened. Back on Earth, the sky cracked, not visibly, not even audibly, but every living creature felt it. A single moment, a breath in the wrong direction, and every clock paused. Not stopped. Paused, as if waiting for a new story to begin. The child stood beneath the broken sky. The seer stood beside him. And Hollow Grace walked out from the mountain with her silver veins glowing brighter than the sun. "It's coming," she said. The child asked softly, "What is?" She looked into the sky and whispered, "The one who wrote the stories." The stars had stopped moving, not slowed, stopped. Even light refused to travel. Across the universe, it was as if reality had taken a breath and held it, waiting. No explosions, no gunfire, no voices. Just a pause. And in that pause, A presence arrived, not through wormholes, not with ships or fleets or planetary engines. It arrived like a memory, like something forgotten so long ago that remembering it broke the mind in half. The weave had called it the author. But even that name was wrong. Names came after. This was before. Hollow Grace was the first to see it, not with her eyes, with the threads behind them. Standing atop the mountains of earth, beneath the cracked sky, she raised one hand and whispered, "It's begun." The seer said nothing. The child only stared at the horizon, eyes wide with fear for the first time since he had spoken his first word to the stars. "It's rewriting," he said. "I can feel it." And in that moment, every sentient being across every surviving world felt it too. Their memories, fluid, fragile, began to shift. Birthdays forgotten, wars misplaced, species that never existed flickered into their dreams. History itself became uncertain. The Varnock, what remained of them, tried to hide. They fled into sealed time loops, paradox holes, blind dimensions. It didn't work, not because they were being hunted, but because they were being rewritten. Whole archives turned to smoke. Their language unraveled mid-sentence. Words became colors. Dates became songs. Even their dead could not be remembered. And as their last grand architect stared into the sky, trying to record one final log, he found his hands were no longer hands. He was becoming something else, a thought, a lesson, a footnote in someone else's script. Then he was gone. The author didn't speak like the seer, didn't question like the weave, didn't judge like the echoed. It simply was. A concept so ancient that it couldn't be perceived directly. Instead, it filtered itself through moments, echoes inside moments that hadn't happened yet. A child stepping backward and becoming their own ancestor. A soldier blinking and realizing they had never held a weapon. A mother hearing her child's first cry and understanding the sound was older than sound itself. It was storytelling in reverse. The ending was arriving before the beginning. The child looked at Hollow Grace. His voice shook. "Why is it here?" She answered softly, "Because the story went too far." The seer turned its head to the sky and whispered, more to itself than anyone, "We were only ever chapters." On a frozen world light years from Earth, a forgotten AI lay dormant. It had once been a tool of the Varnock, designed to predict civilizations before they rose. It had successfully mapped over 200 species into extinction. But now, it flickered awake, unbidden. Not by signal, by instinct. It broadcasted a message into the dark. Simple. Desperate. Query, "Is this the end?" And across the void, the author answered, not in words, in silence, so complete, so absolute, that the AI shut itself off, not from error, but from reverence. Back on Earth, Hollow Grace began to disintegrate, not violently, elegantly. She smiled as her feet became equations. As her skin turned into starlight, as her thoughts blended into stories not yet written. The child tried to hold her hand, but it passed through. "You're not dying," he whispered. She nodded, peaceful. "I was never alive. I was just a bridge, and now the bridge has served its purpose." The seer stepped forward. For the first time it reached out, as if to save her, but she was already gone, not ascended, not taken, just completed. The sky cracked again, this time fully, not metaphorically. The stars peeled away like pages in a book too long read, and beyond them, the hand. Massive, boundless, made not of matter but idea. It didn't reach down. It turned the sky, like a page. And on the other side was another story. But before the page turned fully, the child shouted, "Wait!" and the author paused. Just long enough. He stepped forward, alone, his voice small, but sure. You made all this, but you never gave us a pen. You let us live in your pages, but you never let us write. We're tired of being endings. We want beginnings. And somewhere, deep within the pause, the author listened. Not with approval, not with denial, just awareness. The seer stepped beside the boy. Its voice was small now, ashamed. We tried to contain the chaos. We thought it would protect you. We didn't realize the chaos was the point. The child turned to him, smiled. It always was. Then turned back to the sky. Let us write. The author slowly lowered the hand. Not in dismissal, in offering, and between its fingers, a pen. Not metal, not wood, not even symbolic. It was choice. It hovered above the earth, and the boy reached for it, but paused. Not just me. He looked behind him, at the broken world, at the last humans, the last Varnock, the echoed, the dying, the forgotten. He shouted, with a voice amplified across every system, every particle. All of us, and the pen lowered, and the page turned again, the stars returned. But different. Names changed, histories rearranged, but this time not by force, by consent. Worlds that had died were rewritten as dreams. Species that had vanished returned as myths. The Varnock? No longer tyrants, just warnings. The seer? No longer a warden, but a librarian. And humanity? Not warriors, not prisoners, but authors. The war ended, not with death, but with rewriting. And in the quiet that followed, the boy placed the pen on a stone altar, in the ruins of the first city, and spoke the final line. Congratulations. You didn't start a war with something worse than death. He smiled. You started a story.